الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد الصادق الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Alhamdulillah, we are back together in the physical space of the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have been physically apart for quite a while, a couple of months, and we were doing the Lives of Man class virtually online, and we stopped right before Ramadan. We were talking about the end of life. So we want to pick up where we left off, but before we do that, we want to go back to the beginning and retrace our steps on the journey of the human being from the realm prior to this realm and to where we are right now. So the book we're covering, that we've been covering for a few months, The Lives of Man, is a book by Imam Abdullah bin Alawi al-Haddad, rahmatullahi alayh. And in this book, he describes the stages of the human being's existence. He talks about the various stages the human being experiences prior to this life, in this life, after this life. And he mentions 5 stages. The 5 stages are in order: the realm of souls, the alam al-arwah, followed by the life of dunya, the lower world that we're at now, followed by the barzakh, the life in the grave, followed by Yawm al-Qiyamah, the day of judgment. And after the judgment takes place, there is the 5th realm, which is the eternal abode. For some people, it will be Jannah, and for others, it will be hell. فَرِيقٌ فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَفَرِيقٌ فِي السَّعِيرِ, as Allah Ta'ala says. A party in Jannah and a party in the inferno, the blazing fire. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. So those 2 realms are 2 separate realms, but they're considered one insofar as they are the eternal abode. Once a person enters Jannah, khalas, they don't come out. Once a person enters hellfire, can we say khalas, they don't come out? No, some muwahidun come out. People of Tawheed come out, but others do not. So that is the eternal abode. So we've covered the alam al-arwah, and we've covered the life of dunya, and we've gone through all of the stages in dunya up to the very end, which is sickness and death. We talked about the various stages of the human being in this dunya that we go through, and if I'm not mistaken, Imam al-Haddad mentions around 5. So he mentions infancy, early childhood and adolescence. He mentions the prepubescent stage, before the child attains the age of moral responsibility, taklif. He talks about the age of taklif, of moral responsibility, which is from the onset of puberty, at which point a person is a shab, a youth. That's the period of youth, which extends up to the age of what? 40, according to some. Others may shorten that a little bit. Ibn al-Jawzi shortens it to around 35 or so. After which comes maturity, then comes seniority, and then comes this decrepitude, that final stage when a person reaches an old age where things become a lot more challenging physically. What was once easy is now hard, and the person loses a lot of their faculties. And Imam al-Haddad talks about the final stages. He talks about sickness and death. So we want to go there again and recap and look specifically at the issue of the way we leave the world. Specifically, husnul khatima 'inda al-maut versus su'ul khatima. We want to talk about the good end versus the bad end. This is of supreme importance for all of us because we don't know how we're going to die. The wheel is always turning, and you don't know how the wheel is going to end up towards the end of your life. So let's see what he says about this. Now he says here, and I'm reading from page 36 of the translation, he mentions that the dying may be subject to various kinds of temptation, and may Allah protect us. And it is therefore recommended that the people who are present recite Quran in abundance and mention hadith which condemn the things of the world. It has been related that Shaitan, may Allah curse him, is nearest to the servant at the time of his death, eager to tempt him. But that his sultan, his power, is only over those who take him for an ally and those who associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As for people of Iman, يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. Allah makes firm those who believe with the firm word in the life of this world and in the hereafter. So this way of dying is of supreme importance. Here he mentions that the dying may be subject to different fitan, temptations at the end of their life. And sometimes this comes by way of whispering from Shaitan. And we have a rich account of this in our literature. I believe it was Imam al-Qurtubi. Either he was speaking about his own personal experience or he was citing the experience of someone else. I don't recall. But he mentions in his book, At-Tathkira, a very large book on death, dying, the hereafter, he mentions an experience, assuming it's his or someone else's. If it was him, we'll go by that. We'll say it was him. I have to double check. But it mentions that he was suffering from a very, very difficult illness. An illness that he felt almost took his life. It was almost a death illness. He was so sick. And he says that in this sickness, while he was in the throes of fever and pain, he was delirious. And he thought he was going to die. And in those moments, his mother appeared to him. What he thought was his mother appeared to him in a physical form and said to him, "Dear son, become a Christian, for it is the best of ways." He's seeing this in those moments of delirium and fever. He says, "A'udhu billah," and the image goes away. And then moments later, he sees his father in a similar image. And he says, "I died as a Yahud." And he's Qurtuba, Jews there. He said, "I died as a Jew. And by Allah, it's the best of ways." And he said, "A'udhu billah." And this vision or image he was shown went away. And he realized that this was just Shaitan. Interestingly, I had a friend maybe 25 plus years ago. We were traveling together and he got a stomach bug. We were in Pakistan. And he was so sick that he felt he was going to die. He was deathly ill. And in the state of illness, when he finally got better, he said, in that state, I was hearing gospel music, Christian gospel music in my ear, and I was hearing voices talking about, go back to your Christianity, your roots. He was a convert. He said, "A'udhu billah, what is this? Of all moments, why am I hearing gospel music and these thoughts coming to me?" Shaitan presenting these temptations. However, for the believer should really understand, this is critically important, that these are either temptations from Shaitan directly, or they are passing thoughts. Now, we have an entire science dedicated to the psychology of thoughts and understanding the roots of thoughts and where they come from. We're going to actually talk about that in the next hadith, hadith 37, on Sunday in the 40 hadith collection. We have the khatir, we have the hajish, we have the ham, we have the azm, we have the different ways of thinking, the hadithun nafs. These are different levels of passing thoughts or thoughts that we roll over in our mind. We have to learn not to overly identify with those passing thoughts that come into our mind. Have you ever walked down the street? I think we mentioned this before. You ever walk down the street and you're somewhere in public and you get a strange thought. It comes out of nowhere. You wonder, I wonder what would happen if I just pushed that person into the middle of the road in oncoming traffic. You don't know where it came from. And as quickly as it enters your mind, it leaves. You don't entertain it. You don't think, well, how could I do that? It's just one of those things. That is a khatir. That's a passing thought. A passing thought is not from us per se. It's what people would call from the monkey mind, just overactive imagination. We don't identify with those thoughts and call them our own. If we do that, we'll start to feel really bad. Oh my God, why am I thinking these really disgusting thoughts? I'm a horrible person. The reality is they come and go like that. We don't want to catch them and hold on to them and think about them, because then they become our own if we do that. Likewise, with these experiences, if they're whisperings of shaitan or even passing thoughts, they're not our own. So just the thought occurring to us in those moments does not mean it's our own thought that we own and are accountable for, but it exists. He says here, the righteous predecessors, the Salaf, may Allah have mercy on them, were very fearful of experiencing a bad ending, su'ul khatima. There are many stories related to this, and some of them do indeed inspire great fear. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, by the one besides whom there is no other God, one of you might do the works of the people of Jannah until only separated from it by an arm's length. And then that which had been written overtakes him, and he does the work of the people of the fire and enters it as a result. And one of you might do the works of the people of the fire until nothing remains between him and it but an arm's length. Then that which had been written overtakes him. He does the work of the people of the garden, and so enters it as a result. So we want to talk about this a little bit. Husnul Khatima and Su'ul Khatima. Now, we mentioned the verse earlier. Imam al-Haddad mentions it. يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. Allah makes firm for those who believe. He makes them firm with a firm word in this life and in the hereafter. What is that firm word? According to Ibn Abbas, it is La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. This means that Allah makes the believer firm with that word, that statement in their life and in the hereafter when they are questioned by the angels. As they leave and transition from this realm to the next realm, Allah grants them thabat, firmness, with holding to La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And that's what we seek. Now, the Husn Khatima, we want to talk about Husn Khatima and Su'ul Khatima, the good end and the evil end. The Husn Khatima comes from Husn, which is beautiful. And it means the beautiful end, the good sealing state, where you leave the world in such a state that is pleasing to Allah Ta'ala. The opposite of it is Su'ul Khatima, which is when a person leaves the dunya in a bad sealing state. Now, these two terms don't refer to what the person was doing their entire life. They refer to the final state they were in at the time of death. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِيمِ. Actions are determined by what seals them. A person can come to the masjid for dhuhr and they enter the salat, Allahu Akbar, they pray 4 rak'ahs, and they're at the tail end in the tashahhud, and they've just finished the final part of a salat al-Ibrahimiyya, and they're about to turn their head and say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah when they break their wudu. They pray 4 rak'ah, they're all the way at the end, and they broke their wudu. Did they say, oh well, I was all the way at the end, so I finished dhuhr? No. They have to go make wudu again. Just because they prayed it perfectly fine from beginning to end doesn't mean they prayed it because they broke the wudu right at the end. They have to get up and make wudu again and pray it over. And this is an analogy to life. If a person is living a certain way their entire life, it's not going to matter much if they die in the opposite state. the way, the manner in which they die, the state they are in with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a determinant of what they're going to face in the hereafter. And this is why it's so scary, because a person can be outwardly righteous. They do all the things they're supposed to do. They check off all the boxes of the pious Muslim, but they don't have a good end. And then there are people who are seemingly not doing so well, but at the end of their life, Allah gives them a good end. So, the wheel is always turning. The ulama mentioned that the evil sealing state, the su'al khatima, is such that even though a person's actions may appear virtuous, it was not congruous or mutabaq, congruous with what was inside. And so what was inside, the reality of the person, came out at the final moment. So what we're looking for is ikhlas, and ikhlas is congruence, this mutabaqa between the inward and the outward. When there's mutabaqa, congruence between the two, you have sincerity. And the evil end is because of that incongruence between the inward and the outward, where outwardly there's piety, but then there's other things. And then it shows at the very end of life. Now, what are some examples of this khatima? We have a lot of stories in our tradition from the early generations who wrote about this. They had many people in their life that they interacted with who had good ends and who had bad ends. I'll start with a good story. There was an individual, this is mentioned by Abdullah ibn Mubarak. If I'm not mistaken, he mentions it in either his Kitab al-Zuhd or Kitab al-Jihad. I don't recall. And he mentions this story, a true story. Now remember, Abdullah ibn Mubarak was a tajir, a businessman. He was also a scholar of hadith, and he was also a murabit and mujahid. He was a person who would engage in buying and selling between the Haram al-Sharif. He would sell goods there and purchase other goods, and he would go to the frontier lands, the border areas of the Muslim territory bordering with Byzantium, Rome. And he would do guard duty there, and he would also engage in battle during that time. So he was a mujahid as well as a scholar, as well as an abid, and he was a very spectacular individual. And he mentions a story about someone who lived in one of these border areas, a Christian. This Christian was one night spending it with his mistress in a state of zina, and he was half drunk, drinking alcohol. He was in a state of drunkenness and sleeping around, and he wasn't even a Muslim. He was living in this border area near the garrison town of the Muslims. And he went to sleep. In his dream, he saw Al-Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, "Has not the time come for you to become a Muslim?" He woke up after seeing this beauty. Iman entered his heart. Certainty entered his heart. He left his house, made his way over to the garrison town where the Muslims were stationed, and expressed his desire to become a Muslim. He became a Muslim. He took the Shahada. And as he was spending time with the Muslims as a brand new Muslim, an attack occurred, because this is a garrison town, it's a border area, there were tensions. And he goes out with these forces, and as they're out and about, guess what happens? An arrow from the enemy side strikes him in the neck and he dies. Just an hour before, he was sleeping around and half drunk as a disbeliever in Allah Ta'ala. He has a dream of the Habib Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, becomes a Muslim, and then shaheed, hakada. Allah decreed this in pre-eternity. This is how he would leave the world. Subhanallah. And we look in the history We see different books were written by ulama who talk about the husn al-khatima and the su' al-khatima. Ibn Abi Dunya, he was a very prolific author. He has a number of books where he talks about this. Other ulama have compiled some of the narrations from his works and others, and we see certain stories. I will mention a few of them to you. So, Ibn al-Qayyim mentions in Al-Jawab al-Kafi a number of these stories. He mentions that there was a man in Damascus who, while on his deathbed, people were telling him, say La ilaha illallah. They were doing the talqeen. And he said, what good will it do? And I haven't prayed a single prayer for Allah. And then he dies. Another man, he mentions, was a businessman engaged in selling cloth, qumash. And as he was dying on his deathbed, people were telling him from his family, say La ilaha illallah. And all he could say was 2 for 1. This cloth is a good quality. You get a deal on this one, not a good deal on that one. He's speaking what he knows. He's speaking what was really important to him in his life at the very last. Ibn al-Qayyim also mentions, this is Ibn al-Jawzi. Ibn al-Jawzi, who died in the year 270 Hijrah, mentions that there was a man named Abdu ibn Abdul Rahim. He was a person who engaged in jihad. He was a mujahid in a Muslim army fighting against the Roman Empire. And in one of these battles, he saw a young woman and he fell in love with her, and she made a condition that he has to leave Islam in order to get married to her. There's a few stories like this, not the only one. And so he becomes a Christian just to get access to this girl, to marry her. She says, become a Christian and I'll let you in. And she let him in. When he became a Christian, professed Christianity, she opened the gate, he came in. And eventually the Muslim forces saw him on the other side, because these are fortresses, or not fortresses, but they are cities surrounded by walls. So it was siege warfare in that day and age. And so they see their friend on the other side. And they became very saddened, because he was a mujahid, he had memorized a good deal of Quran, he was known to be this good guy. And eventually, the siege lasted for a very long time, and many of them left and came back. These things would sometimes drag on for years. Eventually, that area was conquered, and they opened the gates, and they found him again. This is some years later. And it mentions that when they saw him, they recognized him, and they said, come with us, come back. And he said, no, I can't come with you. I'm settled, I'm married, and I have children, I have a business. And they said, where did your jihad go? What happened with your jihad? What happened to your ilm, your knowledge? What happened to your memorization of Quran? He said, I forgot all of that. I forgot all of that except for one verse of Quran. SubhanAllah, Allah removed from him all memory of the Quran except for one verse. He says, I only remember one verse of Quran. رُبَّمَا يَوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوْ كَانُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. Perhaps those who disbelieved will wish that they had been believers. What a suiting verse for that person's situation. Another person was on his deathbed, and when he was told to say La ilaha illallah, all he could say was checkmate. He loved chess. So we see a pattern here that people tend to die as they lived. So if a person is preoccupied with dunya, then this is what they're going to be preoccupied with in the final moments. People like to think that they will rise to the occasion, whether it's death or other moments. It's like a person who they see something going on in the news and they think, well, if that ever happened to me, I would rise to the occasion and I would do this and that. No, you don't rise to the occasion. You usually rise to the level of your training. If a person is has never been tested with a situation where they have been spit on and yelled at and abused, and they see people lashing out and reacting in very negative ways, they may say to themselves, if I was in that situation, I would behave in a different way. I would do X, Y, Z. Not so fast. People rise to the level of their training, usually. They don't rise to the level of, they don't rise to the occasion as a hero. They train. And the same thing goes for death. People think, okay, I could live my life a certain way, and when I'm near my end, on my deathbed, yeah, I'll make tawbah for sure. And I'll say the shahada over and over again, and I'll be in dhikr for sure. Number one, that's presumptuous because the person assumes they're going to die in a pre-planned way, where they're going to be on the deathbed, surrounded by loved ones, and they assume that's going to be the way they die. They don't know. Maybe they die in a state where they're in a coma. It comes suddenly, and they don't have time to prepare. So it's presumptuous. And this is the attitude of the person who thinks they're going to live a certain way and that they'll make tawbah at the end of their life. They have no guarantee that they're going to make it to the end like that. So we have some contemporary stories like this too. One source of many khatima stories is with police officers in Muslim countries, because police officers are dealing with a lot of horrific traffic accidents, and they're often coming as first responders and dealing with people who are in their final moments after a horrific crash. And so when you look in the literature, there's a great deal of literature in Arabic that I know of, perhaps other languages, where Muslim police officers and first responders talk about their experiences with the people in those final moments. People who are involved in car accidents, and the first responder comes and they're in their final moments. One story mentions that of an individual who, in his final moments before dying, the police officer arrives on the scene and realizes that they're too far away to get to the hospital. He's not going to make it. And so he tells him to say La ilaha illallah. And all he can do is sing Michael Jackson songs. That was his love. And on another occasion, a police officer mentions arriving at the scene of an accident, and the person at the scene was in his final moments. He didn't even have to tell him to say La ilaha illallah. He was saying La ilaha illallah and then reciting Quran and then doing dhikr as he arrived on the scene. This is the state he died in. And when this individual died, the police officer wanted to find out, what's this guy's story? And he realized this is so-and-so, and he lived in this city, and he died on the road on the way to another city, a small village. He would go to that village, he would teach Quran, and he would bring sadaqah. And he would do that every other weekend. And he would be reviewing the Quran as he's driving. And this is how he left the world. Alhamdulillah. That's how it is. So, what are some of the signs of a good end or signs of a bad end? We can't plan our own deaths, but we can plan our own lives and to live the way we want to die. As Imam Ali said, die before you die. You die unto the dunya before you physically die. Live as if you are a dead man walking. Make the preparation. Al-isti'dad liyawm al-mi'ad. There are even books by that title. The preparation for the day of return. So, the ulama mention that the husn khatima and the su' al-khatima depend on the person's internal state. And there are certain things that lead to husn khatima and certain things that lead to su' al-khatima. So, what are some of these things? So, one of the causes of su' al-khatima is to have hidden compartments in our life. You know, you have those old houses that have hidden compartments. Well, people often have hidden compartments in their life where they engage in certain haram things that no one knows about and they persist in it. People who have that, it's a danger sign for them. Persisting in major sin like that can be a cause for a su'ul khatima. Another cause of su'ul khatima is backbiting, maligning, and attacking the people who are beloved to Allah. The awliya, righteous ulama, people who are working for the betterment of humanity. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam transmits in the Hadith Qudsi, قال الله عز وجل من عاد لي وليا فقد أذنته بالحرب. Whoever injures or annoys a friend of mine, I declare war against him. And so one of the signs of su'ul khatima, one of the causes of su'ul khatima, is to attack righteous scholars, to attack awliya, to speak ill of them, to accuse them of things. This is one of the causes of an evil end. Another cause of an evil end is to pretend to be a sheikh. All those fake peers, all those fake sheikhs, mudda'i al-mashayikha, all these fake YouTube sheikhs, whether they're claiming to be a sheikh in ilm, shar'i, or whether they're claiming to be a sheikh in tarbiyah, in spirituality. Anyone who is a fake sheikh, a mudda'i, a false claimant, one of the ill effects of that is su'ul khatima 'inda al-maut. People who make claims to being guides, who cannot guide people, who do not have that authority from Allah and His Messenger, who actually are pretenders, they are punished with su'ul khatima 'inda al-maut. And some forms of su'ul khatima are worse than others. Some su'ul khatima is the person being unable to utter the shahada and dying in a state of great terror and fear, followed by punishment. But ultimately they enter Jannah if they are believers. But for others, the su'ul khatima is much worse, because the su'ul khatima is not just punishment, it's salbul iman. It is the removal of faith itself from the heart at the time of death. Wal-'iyadhu billah. Imagine a person who they dress the dress, you know. Every place in the Muslim world has these pretenders. We all hear about them, we see them. They have the nice big turban, the nice sibha, they wear the clothes, yeah, mashallah. The Maulanas, you know, they make lots of claims. And when you try to check out the claims, they don't check out. And ultimately, our mizan is sharia. We can determine by sharia, but sometimes it takes time because people are really good at playing the games. That person, because they're pretending to be what they're not, and they're claiming to hold the mantle to this wirathatun Muhammadiyya, this Muhammadan inheritance, the punishment for them is su'ul khatima 'inda al-maut. Right? So it's very important for teachers, whether they are sheikhs of sharia, whether they're sheikhs, whether they're teaching sharia or aqidah or fiqh or whatever it may be, or spirituality. It's very important for people to know their own limits and not make claims to be that person. Yeah, we say too many chiefs, not enough Indians. It's not a very politically correct way of saying it. We call them Native Americans, but that's an old saying of people making claims, right? You know, too many aqtab, you know, qutb al-aqtab, but there's so many. So there's only one, right? So someone's lying here. There has to be one. So that's a sign of someone who's going to have an evil end. Other signs include having animosity towards the believers, having corrupt beliefs about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having corrupt beliefs about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is especially important because people have lots of strange ideas about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that is one of the causes of Su' al-Khatimah, where a person's beliefs about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam are not mutabiq lil-waqi', they're not congruent with reality. They think of him more like Quraysh thought of him. Yatimu Quraysh, the orphan boy of Quraysh, instead of looking at him as Rasulullah wa Khatam al-Nabiyyin. You know, Allah Ta'ala addresses this reality. He speaks to His beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran and says, وَتَرَاهُمْ يَنظُرُونَ إِلَيْكَ وَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. Such an amazing ayah. Allah addresses the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam and says, you see them looking at you. وَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. But their state when looking at you is that they don't truly see you for who you are. They see only His bashariyah. As Allah Ta'ala says, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ. People forget that part. Say, I am but a man like you. Well, Quraysh and others never doubted for once that the Prophet ﷺ is a human being. No one ever doubted that. So to overemphasize the bashariyah, which has never been in question, is really a door to minimizing his maqam, of lowering his status, to overemphasize the humanity, the human aspect, at the expense of his maqam as Rasul and Nabi and Ummi and all that Allah Ta'ala had given him. One of the poets, the Arab poets, said that don't you see that you disrespect and lower the status of the sword when you say that the sword is as straight as a stick? When you compare a sword to a stick and say the sword is as straight as the stick, you're making the sword lower in its status because you're comparing it to something else, even if it's technically true that it's as straight as the stick. As Imam al-Busayri would say, Muhammadun basharun la ka bashari, bal huwa kal yaquti bayn al-hajari. That Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a human, but not like other humans. He is like a ruby among other ordinary stones. Is a ruby a mineral? Is it a stone like other stones? Well, yes, it's a stone. But can you compare a ruby to a regular rock you see on the sidewalk? Absolutely not. That's another sign. Other signs or other things that lead to su'ul khatimah would be having arrogance, envy, and persisting in the haram. Not just falling into the haram and fighting it and making tawbah, but persisting. Bil israr, insisting on doing it. And stubbornly persisting in that in sin can be a cause of su'ul khatimah. Like, what are the signs of husn khatimah? This is what we want. And we need to know both. We need to know the signs of su'ul khatimah as well as husn khatimah. We need to know what to avoid and what to seek after. Signs of husn khatimah include uttering the shahada at the time of death. But we have to be careful here. Just because a person on their deathbed does not utter the shahada, it is not an indication that they've had a bad end. It's not. But if a person utters the shahada, it is a sign of a good end. As the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man kana akhiru kalamihi la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah." Whoever's last words are la ilaha illallah will enter Jannah. Likewise, a sign of a good end at the time of death is dying with sweat on one's brow. This is the brow. There's the hadith related by Imam Ahmad and At-Tirmidhi, in which the Prophet ﷺ says, Mawtul mu'min bi'arqil jabin. The believer's death is that which has the sweat on the jabin. The jabin is this forehead, like the side, the temples. Likewise, dying the night before Friday or Friday itself. So, Laylatul Jumu'ah, Thursday night after Maghrib, or during the day of Jumu'ah until the Maghrib. And also dying on auspicious occasions as well, right? Dying in Ramadan or the 27th night, dying on a Jumu'ah, whether it's the night preceding it or the day of Jumu'ah. This is a sign of a good end. The hadith mentions, مَا مِن مُسْلِمٍ يَمُوتُ يَوْمَ الْجُمُعَةِ أَوْ لَيْلَةِ الْجُمُعَةِ إِلَّا وَقَاهُ اللَّهُ فِتْنَةَ الْقَبْرِ. There's no believer who dies on Jumu'ah or the night preceding Jumu'ah except that Allah protects them, safeguards them from the trial in the grave. That's a sign of a good end. Dying in battle is a sign of a good end. That's shahada. Dying from the plague, ta'un, waba. Dying from a stomach ailment. Dying from drowning. Dying from a collapsed building. A woman dying in childbirth. These are all signs of a good end. Being killed in defense of one's life, of one's family, of one's wealth. These are all signs of a good end. And lastly, dying while doing any righteous action. And that righteous action can be hidden from the eyes of others. We don't know, right? So what are some of the ways of making sure that that's going to be our reality? And we ask Allah for husn khatimah. Number one, to try to have a clean heart towards other people. It's really hard because people can be annoying. People can be mean. People can do hurtful things. We can have animosities and grudges against people. But if we can have a clean heart towards the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, that will be a means of having a good end at the time of death. And we see this in the hadith of Abu Damdam, we mentioned before. Abu Damdam is this somewhat obscure Sahabi. And the Prophet ﷺ was once sitting with the companions in the masjid, and he said, the person who enters the masjid is a person from Ahlul Jannah. And Abu Damdam enters. And people were wondering, well, what's so special about Abu Damdam, this obscure figure? One of the Sahaba asked to spend some time with him. He spent some time hanging out with him, spent the night with him, and he was observing, what does he do that's so unique? What's so different that he would be described as a person from Ahlul Jannah? He didn't notice anything unique about Abu Damdam. He didn't pray more than anyone else. He wasn't doing anything that set him apart from other people in the community. So he was asked, what is it that you do that's different? He said, I never go to sleep at night until I ask Allah to forgive the believers and to remove any anger or resentment or rancor, ghil, from my heart towards them. You go to sleep, bisalamat sadr, with this sound, clear conscious, clear from ill wills and grudges. This is very, very difficult sometimes. For some people it's easier, others it's harder. Other means include the dua Sayyidul Istighfar, to say it in the morning and the evening consistently. And that is the prophetic dua that we should be saying already in the morning and the evening. That is called the master dua for seeking forgiveness. Allahumma anta rabbi la ilaha illa ant khalaqtani wa ana abduk wa ana ala ahdika wa wa'adika ma stata'at a'udhu bika min sharri ma sana'at abu'u laka bi ni'matika alay wa abu'u bi dhanbi faghfir li fa innahu la yaghfiru dhunuba illa ant. There are entire books explaining the meaning of this very powerful dua. Inshallah, we'll go over them. This dua, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever says it in the morning sincerely and dies that day will enter Jannah. And whoever says it sincerely in the evening and dies that night will enter Jannah. It is the master dua of seeking forgiveness. And it is one of the means of husnul khatima 'inda al-maut. Other means include praying subh and asr in jama'ah, certain practices like this. And we can't narrow them down to one or two actions. There's so many different things that are means of husn khatimah, but these are some noteworthy ones. And ultimately, we don't know how we're going to die, so we can only ask Allah for husn khatimah and al-maut. One of my teachers has repeatedly said, and I believe it to be true, that one of the means of husnul khatimah in today's time especially is to have majalis, gatherings, where a person learns about the Prophet ﷺ. Whether gatherings of shama'il, gatherings about the khasa'is and the manaqib, gathering of mawlid, whatever it may be, where a person is learning about and attaching themselves to the person of the Prophet ﷺ. Those gatherings are a means of securing iman and having a husnul khatimah, having a good end at the time of death. This is why it's so important. And the further a person is from the Prophet ﷺ and knowing him, the worse off they're going to be. And the closer they are to him and the more they know of him, the more attachment they have to him, the better off they're going to be in this life and the next. And so we ask Allah Ta'ala for that husn khatimah and al-maut.